I've had 2 days of riding the Giant XTC Plus with 29er race wheels. The first day was long but somewhat easy. Today I picked up the pace a little bit. How does the bike feel when the hammer gets dropped? That's what we're going to talk about in this video. Now this video is one that I'm going to call kind of an interim video in my Project 275 Plus video series. It's actually one that I didn't intend to make, but after hammering the bike today on my cross-country loops, I decided to go ahead and make a video on what I felt about it. So I want to say something that I said in the first video with the 29er wheels on, and that is Giant has absolutely nailed the geometry of this bike. The new trend of bikes is to have a longer top tube, shorter stem, and a little bit slacker head angle, and I'm telling you, it makes this bike handle so well. I enjoy the handling of this bike more than my 9er RKT9. This bike has a 69-degree head angle with a 60mm stem. My 9er has a 90mm stem and it's got a 71-degree head angle. Now on paper it looks like the steeper head angle is going to be the better handling bike of just how quick it is, but I found on this bike that I'm actually getting around the corners just as quickly but more confidently. I feel like I have more traction on this bike with this particular geometry in the 29er wheels. Now of course I don't have as much traction as the plus size wheels, but compared to the 9er RKT9 I feel like the bike just grabs the corners a little bit harder and, like I said, a little bit more confidently. And I'm really looking forward to getting back on the 9er RKT9 in a couple days and kind of feeling that difference going from this bike with the 29er wheels back on the full suspension. Now that being said, I still prefer the full suspension with the 29er wheels. I'm a full suspension type of guy, and like I said in my previous video, because of the fact that I sit in the saddle a lot, I just feel like I can crank harder and just focus on putting power to the pedals as opposed to getting out of the saddle and absorbing bumps. But I did get more used to this bike the second day. So like I said, today was the day that I really put the hammer down. I didn't intend, I should say, to do a timed lap, but I couldn't help it. I had to get a timed lap in. Now let me first of all say that we had a couple inches of rain the night before, which really helped. Traction went from being slippery to being awesome. The thing about when you get rain is that sometimes the soil can be a little bit moist, obviously, and it causes a little bit more rolling resistance. So I'm not going to put a lot of weight into that time trial. What I want to do tomorrow is get back out on this bike, do my full-on 2-lap time trial, because I only did the first lap, the first loop that I do. I want to do a full-on time trial on this bike, and then the next day put the wheels back on the 29er full suspension, the 9er, and do those same 2 laps and see how those times compare. So I did the first loop that I've been doing with my tests, and my best time on the full suspension 29er was 13:47. Today on this bike, 14:07, so 20 seconds slower. And I don't know if that was because of the slower soil or, like I said, just not being able to charge quite as hard over the roots. Obviously that time was faster than my best time on the Plus bike, and that was by 5 seconds. So really not a huge difference. So one thing that I was thinking of when I was out riding this bike, if you've been paying attention to the cycling news lately, Carl Decker showed up at the Sea Otter Classic this year on a totally revised Giant Anthem 29er. Yes, Giant is going back to 29ers, thank God. They make such good carbon frames that I would love to see this geometry, and I don't know if you can do it, I don't know if you can get the chainstays that short, it'd be a miracle. But if you could get this geometry on an Anthem 29er, you're talking cross-country perfection. So we'll see. That bike's probably going to come out mid to late summer. I'll be keeping my eye out on that bike. So I mentioned that I was actually getting more used to riding this bike with the 29er wheels. The first day that I headed out, I really didn't pick up the pace. I was just kind of meandering along. I did push it a little bit, but not much. But what I found was when you're really putting the hammer down on this bike, because you're putting more pressure on the pedals, you're leaning forward a little bit more, getting low in the corners, I didn't feel like it beat me up as much. In fact, I was like, I could race this bike easily. I could race this bike as long as the course isn't too crazy rough. You know, I got used to it. So, you know, I started out on a hardtail, like probably most of the people watching this video. I spent years riding a hardtail. Now, I did have suspension seat posts on a lot of my hardtails. People used to laugh at me. I had a Niner Air 9 RDO, which is a full carbon bike, with a Thudbuster seat post. The seat post probably weighed as much as the frame, but I loved riding it, and I loved having the suspension seat post. But my point is that I started to quickly get used to riding a full-on hardtail with standard width tires. Where I feel like the hardtail with the standard 29er tires really comes into its own is when you're climbing. I mean, hardtails just climb so well. Instant power to the ground, and with these 29er wheels that are, you know, the tires are lighter than the Plus wheels, that's where you can really make up time on this bike. And I may have mentioned this in some of my videos in the past. This may sound counterintuitive, but I feel like racing or riding a hardtail in the mountains is a little bit better than my local flatter trails. And the reason I said that is because what I've alluded to before is on my trails, I'm not out of the saddle that much. And usually when you're descending, you're out of the saddle, full suspension or hardtail. When you're out of the saddle on a hardtail, you can let the thing bounce around, and especially with the 124. This is a really good spec on this bike, even set up as a race bike. It just really aids in that geometry that's stable. But I do feel like that on my local trails where I'm trying to stay in the saddle more and just keep the power down, I feel more comfortable on full suspension. And you know, again, I know that sounds counterintuitive, that a full suspension may be a little bit better for flatter terrain, but that's just my personal observation. Your mileage may vary, but I just wanted to throw that out there. And I do want to throw in the same thing that I said before about the Giant carbon. Giant makes such good carbon. It is not overly harsh. It's still light and fast and stiff. But also the Stan's Valor wheels, they have a little give to them. They're not built overly harsh either. So those two things, you know, they make this bike a really good 29er hardtail. So that's my interim bonus video in my Project 275 Plus. I'm in the midst of making my hardtail versus full suspension bike, where again I'm comparing this one to the Niner with the same wheels. So it's a good comparison. Some people have said they don't feel like my comparisons before have been apples to apples because of the heavier wheel set on the Plus bike. You know, I gotta do what I can. You know, I got a budget, I've got to stick to it. So I'd love to put some carbon Plus wheels on this bike and see how it compares. But anyway, I'm wrapping up this video. Stay tuned to the hardtail versus full suspension video. That one's going to be pretty interesting, and I'm going to have fun making that one. Hopefully you'll have as much fun watching it. Thanks for watching.